The library is open because reading is fundamental.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, joined by the media literacy expert, Nick Zeraris. And today we are going to be talking all about using critical thinking skills when looking at media. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. It's always a fun time, I feel like, really, regardless of current events, to just kind of question the legitimacy of things.
Yeah, it's always good to be skeptical. That you don't want to be jaded, you don't want to be cynical, but you want to be skeptical. Anytime you're being given information, you want to think for a second why this information is available to you, because nobody has information for the benefit of the world. Information goes to these places, whether it's news media, entertainment venues like podcasts and stuff like that. It's going to those places for a reason. It's going out there to advance an agenda, to get a narrative out there, that kind of thing. And you got to be able to take a step back. And this is a real issue we have now, where so much of conversation is driven by social media. And social media is, by design, short form, in and out content. You can pop in and out whenever you want. You only see limited perspectives. You only see certain points of view. And it doesn't lend itself to really explaining detailed positions and giving nuanced ideas, because social media is about instant gratification. If you open your phone, you want to scroll, that's funny, I'll like that, I'll retweet that, whatever. But generally speaking, that's why you have situations like what you had over the last day and a half, 2 days, with the Blue Jackets and the podcast that shall not be named, because the truth probably lies somewhere in between the middle of these two perspectives. But before we get there, and we'll keep talking about it, we'll go a little more detailed and point out specific vestiges, specific instances that we can kind of use as examples, really. The idea of media literacy is a relatively newer thing, because I don't want to say for a long time, it was just kind of like, it was really hard to print stuff. So it was expensive, and only people printing stuff were people, who had a vested interest in getting quality stuff out there. Like, the reason newspapers don't exist anymore is because they don't have advertising anymore. Well, it used to be really hard to print a newspaper. So you had to you had to get people to buy advertising to help pay for your staff, to pay for physically printing your newspaper. So now that we exist in a world where anybody can get on the internet and say absolutely anything at any time, we need a comprehensive idea of literacy, of being able to understand media. And there's different avenues within this idea. So like what I'm talking about specifically is news media literacy. I'm not talking about like being able to understand a movie or a book. That's an entirely different. They are both media literacy, but they are different concepts. So
we're talking news, like
literacy,
factual things. I mean, movies and books, like that's entertainment. We're talking like,
that's a different type of literacy. That's where like media literacy in that respect is like right-wing people liking Rage Against the Machine because they don't understand Rage Against the Machine. That's the example of media literacy in that respect I will give. As far as this, I can say this. This is a bad job out of me. I have a pin they gave us when I finished news literacy in college that says I finished news literacy, because there are a couple different concepts within the overarching idea of news literacy. So number one is understanding why information is available to us. Like I said before, what is this person's goal by saying this? Is this entertainment? Is this news? Is this somewhere in between where the lines are kind of blurred, which is kind of what's happened in the hockey media landscape, especially, where podcasts fill an outsized role in the conversation? Because TV hockey doesn't really have a presence on American television during the daytime. Aside from games, you don't really have American talking head hockey shows like you do on TSN or Sportsnet, on that kind of thing. So that starts here. When we think about it, okay, why is this out there? Well, is this person trying to make us laugh? Are they trying to inform us? Are they trying to comment on how absurd something is? That's really that's the frustration I think a lot of people have, is there isn't really there aren't enough authoritative voices in the hockey space to be like, I can't confirm or deny this, where you get blanket statements from two sides, and that's all we get. We don't get well, no, actually, or, well, I've heard this. It's the Blue Jackets are saying this, the person who said this is saying this, and they butt heads for a few days, and then the story dies because people lose interest and move on to the next topic.
Yeah, and I feel like basically what I saw on Twitter yesterday was people not realizing that two negative things can exist in the same story. There doesn't have to be a villain and a good guy. There can be two good guys or two bad guys. It doesn't necessarily have to be so concrete. And I feel like with hockey, especially, like, you really do have to look at things critically half the time, because you do have to read between the lines. If you just take guys saying, oh, we just have to shoot the puck, we're a team, at face value, like, there's more to that. And
yes,
I feel like there are situations where players want to say more, but don't feel like, I don't know if it's because they don't feel like they can. That's a gentleman's sport, so they're just, not getting their hands dirty. So it's interesting. And to think about it from like a pop culture kind of sort of view, when you see a celebrity being photographed by the paparazzi, there's a reason usually why that's happening. And it's someone, sometimes you call them on yourselves, or your agent, your publicist, whoever's calling them for you. Like Nick said at the top of the show, you're seeing certain things because they are meant to be seen. If you weren't supposed to know about it, you wouldn't know about it.
And that's part of why the NHL ecosystem is the way it is, because everybody looks out for each other, where it is really hard for stories to get told, because there's a real, well, if you talk about this, people aren't going to talk to you anymore. You're going to be out of the loop. You're going to be out of the boys club. And that kind of reinforces the culture of silence we've seen. I mean, that's why I probably said like an hour ago, Elliotte Friedman did a radio hit, and I saw him say something to the effect of, well, we would know if this was an issue. If someone really had an issue with Mike Babcock doing this, we would have heard about this before. And just
people want him to fail. It's like,
just being completely ignorant of the subtext that exists within the hockey space, that it takes a while sometimes for people to realize, well, wait a minute, that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened to me. That was bad. And sometimes people deal with real traumas from environments they were in, where it takes them a while to reconcile with what happened to them, to feel comfortable enough to talk about it. And then it takes other people coming forward to kind of feel like, okay, if someone else can do it, I can do it too. And that creates a chain reaction where you see people feel empowered because they know they're not alone in the situation. Now, this is on a sliding scale here. This is not the most egregious thing Mike Babcock has been accused of doing, but this is still not comfortable. Like, I can understand if you want to look. Oh, actually, I'll save this for the next segment, because this is a full-fledged point. This isn't a 30-second point.
Well, you're going to want to stick around, because we're just going to dive deeper and deeper and peel the onion and get to the layers. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break here and talk about one of our new sponsors, Jase Medical. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected, and that's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. The Jase case provides 5 antibiotics for emergency use that give you peace of mind in any sort of medical emergency, and when it might be a little more difficult to get to the doctors or urgent care. Jase Medical makes sure that you have the medication you need in hand. It's simple, and Jase Medical handles everything from the online evaluation to the licensed pharmacist medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout. on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Promo code locked on. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Locked On Flames. Today, we are continuing the fun side of, I feel like, media in general. And I know that this is kind of something that I'm passionate about because some people, it's one of those critical thinking skills that needs a little more beefing up, I feel like, in our society.
This is one of those things where if you haven't formally studied journalism, communications, anything of that ilk, you're going to be looking at us like, why are you taking this so seriously? Why are you talking about this? Well, but when you read as many textbooks as Jess and I have had to read about this kind of thing, it sticks with you at some point, and you kind of realize a lot of why things happen the way they do. So before I was about to say, if you want to give Mike Babcock the benefit of the doubt, that's one end of it. And then if you want to give the podcast that shall be not named the benefit of the doubt, you have to look at what we call source evaluation. Who is saying this and why? Whenever you have somebody in a position of authority, like a coach, an organization, a president of hockey operations, whatever, they will always benefit from the blanket denial, because the blanket denial ends the conversation right there. You don't concede any ground. You say, well, no, that's not what happened. And the other person, even as much as they're pounding their chest about, well, no, this is what I was told. This is what I was told. The blanket denial does the job in the media landscape we exist in, where, okay, the news story's over now. There's nothing new to develop here, because there aren't often follow-up stories. I was reading something about this today, and I want to say it was the New Yorker or New York Magazine. I forget what it was. It was something about a biography about Elon Musk. And the title of the article was how Elon Musk went from superhero to supervillain. And the idea generally of the article was, a lot of the time when you are interviewing famous people, powerful people, it is very easy to let them take you for the ride because you need the access, because whatever they say is news because they are an important, a famous, a wealthy person. And that doesn't lend itself to follow-up stories, to actually checking in to see if what that person said is true or not, because you can overpromise and underdeliver consistently, like Elon Musk has for most of his professional life, and still people will take you seriously because of your platform. And in the hockey landscape, which we're going to talk about specifically in the third segment, how the NHL media landscape is really fractured and really insulated, where everybody's kind of off in their own little space within an overarching umbrella we call the hockey media, it makes it really easy for one person to do something like this, to say, well, somebody in the league told me this, and then everybody else who, has to play catch up, like we saw, where Friedman had to say, well, I'm following up on this. The Blue Jackets say this. One person in the organization says yes. One person in the organization says blanket no, denial. And that's why we end up with this and then everybody has to take a side, which is the other issue that we lose on this. It becomes another chapter, another piece of what the culture war, where it's you believe in authority or you believe in victims. There's no middle ground where it's, let's see what happens here. You give the benefit of the doubt to the subordinate, the person who doesn't have as much authority, because the person in power has the benefit of the protections of authority. Somebody giving that blanket denial, that's all they have to do. This story will be a non-story by probably Friday, in all honesty, if that. If the only way this keeps going is if the podcast that shall not be named continues to make this a thing. Because in the Blue Jackets' mind, this is over with. And we see this a lot in the NHL. We see this a lot in sports in general. Hell, we see this a lot in culture in general, where the powerful institution, the organization, whatever, all they got to do is the blanket denial until the news story dies down. And then everybody moves on because nobody has an attention span anymore. And yes, I'm guilty of that too. I have no attention span either. I try my best to follow up with news stories and see when there are things that get corrected, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it's hard to keep up with everything because there is so much information.
There's so much of it.
And that's why we're doing a crash course. That's why we're giving a crash course in media literacy here. So source evaluation, very simple. We are looking at people's track records of reporting things. If you see an anonymous account on Twitter with 3 followers and 100 following that says, the Calgary Flames are going to trade for Connor McDavid tomorrow, you can go out on a limb and say, okay, this person hasn't tweeted anything. They have not shown a track record of reporting anything. And for all intents and purposes, this is just a random person on the internet. And now we've seen this on occasion where there are people who are in the know, who have burner accounts like that, who aren't following anyone, where like the Philadelphia 76ers general manager very famously was a person who was running a burner account, tweeting basketball takes, interacting with other people's tweets, that kind of thing. So when you think about it from that perspective, you have to take these things with a grain of salt. So the way I was talking about this in a group chat with like 20 other journalism people, because, you know, nerds, that kind of thing, you don't give either side the benefit of the doubt in a case like this, because neither side, it doesn't benefit either side to tell the truth. One side is an entertainment podcast. Those are not journalists. They don't pretend to be journalists. Occasionally, they say they are not journalists, that we are just trying to advocate for the players, that kind of thing. When it comes to that, you have to take them at their word. When they say they are not journalists, they are not journalists. They don't have standards. And that's the other part of this when we talk about source evaluation and if someone's credible or not. Journalists maintain standards. It's very common for people like Jess and I, who are on the tertiary of sports media, to hear things from other people. Occasionally we get tidbits, and I have no way of verifying this information. I can't go into the NHL Central Registry like my friend who every now and then can throw me something and tell me, "Oh, this is going to happen."
Trade.
Exactly. When they tell me that, they are telling me that so I can get prepared to go and do content about it, not so I can report. There are a lot of people who exist in the hockey ecosystem who they have the same connections. They know people who work in the league and around the league and in sports media who will just take what they are told, tweet it, and that's it, and say that's news, and because they heard it, that's it. The issue with that is, in journalism, when you go to report something, you need to have two sources to verify. There is a thing called the two-source rule. At least that is the general standard. The general standard for any type of journalism is a two-source rule. So, as they often tell you, we're not journalists. He may have been told that anecdotally by one person in a text message. Hey, can you believe Babs made us airdrop our photo albums up onto the smartboard in front of the rest of the meeting so we could look through what we did this summer? And to Biz, he says, "Oh, that's funny. That's ridiculous. I'm going to tell this on the podcast." Not realizing, oh, this is going to be a news story when I talk about this, because he's just trying to entertain everyone. He is not doing journalism.
Yeah, and I think, if Mike Babcock wants to go through my phone, it's quite literally just reaction pictures. So have fun with that, I guess. You can use them for your season, I'm sure. But I wish people would realize that, like, there's a very, very big difference in journalistic integrity between that and like Elliotte Friedman.
Yes, and we're going to talk about Elliotte Friedman and the insiders in a minute when we get to how the NHL operates concept.
Yeah, it's
part of
it. Spectrum.
Yes, it is.
You want to be on a better side of that spectrum because your reputation, what kind of story.
Well, there's some people who just don't care about their reputation, which is also part of this issue. That there is a vast majority of people who operate in this ecosystem who don't care. They just want to get as much engagement as they can so they can go and try and get a job by saying, "Hey, look, I can do all of this." And that's what it comes down to. Or if they're doing something on a click model website where I got this many clicks this month, that kind of thing. That's what it's about for them. It's not about the journalism. It's not about reporting for the greater good, the thing that I like to tell myself I'm doing in between the silly things I post.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, again, there's a line, there's balance. No one's saying you have to be, full reporter mode all the time or just silly content creator all the time. Like you can do both things.
Yeah, you can put different hats on.
Yeah, and that's what's so fun about, this kind of stuff, because we don't have to. I mean, there's like rules that we have to.
Yeah, no, we operate with standards here. We operate with standards. Like 2 summers ago, when they were about to sign Kadri, and I texted you, "Hey, the Flames are about to sign Kadri. You should get ready to do content." We operate under, general ethical rules here, where somebody told me this in confidence, and I can't independently verify it myself. If I get told something and I can verify it, then I will report it.
Right. And it's really, again, that simple. But social media has just taken
fried media. Fried media in general.
It's so bad. But coming up next, we are going to talk about the wonderful, fantastic, thriving media ecosystem here in the NHL. And thank you everyone for hanging out with us today as we talk about some fun things ahead of the NHL season. And this is our last week of off-season content scheduling. So we're back to 5 days a week next week.
Yep.
We hope you are ready. What do you think of like the most legitimate sources or reputable sources in the NHL? Who do you think of?
By default, it's Elliotte, because it's Elliotte, it's Chris Johnston, Jeff Merrick. That's really the top of the media food chain here. And so we'll talk about it in this respect, because I titled this section How the NHL Operates, because it's all a big pond, okay? There's all these fish in the pond, and all the way at the bottom are the people who are just on Twitter, who don't like anything, who don't retweet anything. They just scroll. They follow a bunch of people, and that's the vast majority of people who use Twitter, is the people who are just scrolling. They are not posting. It's only like 5% of the people on Twitter post like 70% of the content, something extreme to that respect. The vast majority at the bottom of that pool, the smallest people in that pond, are just the fish that are swimming along. All the way at the top of that food chain are the newsmakers, are the Friedmans, Merricks, Chris Johnstons, the people who get genuine news because they are plugged in, because they have the right connections, or they get the email from the NHL. And because sometimes that's why when you see somebody tweet like, "Oh, can confirm," after the team graphic has already been posted, it's because they checked their email. Oh, the trade finally went through.
Yeah, everyone got the press release at the same time.
Exactly.
That's why you will see 13 of the same tweets in a row, and then the team graphic.
Exactly. Those are the people all the way at the top. Mm-hmm. In the dead middle are the content people, the people who are doing the podcasts, who are doing the blogs, who are posting the memes, who are doing YouTube, TikTok, Vine. RIP for Vine. I forgot Vine doesn't exist anymore in my brain. I was like, short form video. But yeah, all of those people, those are the people in the dead middle who they need the newsmakers to give them content so they can make their own content, because the vast majority of content people are giving you their opinion about something that is going on. And then in between those two, you have the people who are doing content, who have a big platform. You think people like Steve Dangle. You think about people like the podcast that shall not be named. You think about the podcast John Scott does, the one that Andy Strickland does, where those people have journalistic connections. They have ties to the league, but they're still doing entertainment. They're getting guys on their podcasts and their videos to tell stories, to tell jokes, to make people like, oh, it's cool, the NHL. I would like to be in the NHL. It'd be cool if I was in the NHL. That's the vast majority of those types. And then in between all of that, you have the people who are just post. The aggregators, the people who are just, I don't know. That's always been a question I have, is why the people who do the aggregate stuff do it, because that is just a brutal grind.
Validation.
It's a brutal grind for not a lot of reward, because like at best, even if you are getting ad revenue from, Instagram or Twitter or whatever, it's not enough to justify being at Photoshop 9 hours a day. Like genuinely, the people who are doing update accounts for the NHL are posting, 10, 15 times a day, making graphics every single time there's a bit of news.
Who's paying them?
Exactly. You cannot be doing that independently and just surviving on ad revenue, because it's not tenable. It's not. Believe me, if it was, I would be doing it.
Right. Like this is a prime example. Like we don't make, or not us, but content creators typically don't make their income, like their full livable income, off of like one content thing.
No.
That they're doing.
The top 1% of content creators are doing that because they have the YouTube partnership, or they're on Twitch, or where they have something on top of the ad revenue to mitigate how much it takes to do that full time, because it is a real commitment to do that type of thing full time, where you're contentifying your life. Like what's it called? There's a line in the self-titled song from the latest 1975 album, mining all the bits of you think you can sell. That is effectively what everybody who does content is doing. The people who are doing the day in the life vlogs, those are people contentifying their life because they need to fill the void of content. And we've gotten a little lost in the weeds here in this conversation because this is such a grand topic. Like, you could teach an entire 16-week college course on this. I took a 16-week course on media literacy. So circling back around, getting back on the tracks for the last 5 minutes here, you got to remember how the NHL operates. You've got the teams and you've got the news media. These two are supposed to be in conflict with each other. These are supposed to be entities that don't always have the same interests aligned. So when you have an NHL team saying, well, no, blanket denial, nothing happened of the sort, this is an entire mischaracterization of what happened, you have to say, well, who does it benefit for the NHL team to lie? The NHL team. Right. Who does it benefit for the podcast to lie about what they're talking about? No one really. Like, at the end of the day, we know they're not journalists. They're not credible. They have what we call jester's privilege, where we know no matter what they say, we're not taking them seriously because they're a joke. Every now and then they do get scoops. They do get tidbits because they have friends in the league. But by reporting that, getting the blanket denial, all that podcast has done is got more attention. Yeah. That is the only con of this entire process for them, is they maybe can't get people from the Blue Jackets to come on their podcast anymore. That's really the only downside of this entire fiasco. And it's why you see so much of this rage engagement stuff from these types of podcasts where it's, oh yeah, no, that's ridiculous. Trying to rile people up to get people to have a reaction to it. Yeah. And it only furthers the insulation that we all have, where people only engage with the content that they enjoy, that they find informative or entertaining. And it insulates everybody. And because people are so insular, it's, well, I don't like the podcast, but I know that hockey team is probably lying about this too. People who are operating rationally and saying, well, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And that's right. That's what I said all day yesterday, is there's probably some exaggeration going on one end of it, but this wasn't just entirely made up out of the blue, like the Blue Jackets are saying. That's where you have to use your critical thinking skills, where you have to say, who does it benefit for this position to be out there? And for these two sides of an argument, who does it benefit from one side of the argument versus the other? And that's how you have to look, especially in the sports world, where the journalism isn't exactly, it's not like the New York Times. It's not like Ronan Farrow sitting down to get the bottom of this. It's this person who works for this organization telling somebody who works for a media organization that is very often a television partner of the NHL, which is also a real issue we've talked about on the show a lot, is it's a direct conflict of interest for the NHL to be television partners with ESPN, with TSN, with TNT, because you are supposed to, as a news organization, be objective. If you have a financial relationship with a party, it is hard for you, and frankly, it's a conflict of interest outright. If you want to say, well, we keep those two things separate, we do journalism, and then when we're doing our pregame show, intermission report, postgame show, that's entertainment, you can say that. But anybody who's trained in journalism and has an understanding of the ethics of these types of relationships knows that that's not acceptable. You cannot objectively cover someone who is paying your bills.
Exactly. And that's really the biggest lesson here is, if the check's coming from someone that this person is reporting on, it's not gonna be the full truth. And I thought it was kind of wild that Johnny Gaudreau ended up talking about it so quickly and denying it, because before I had any context, I thought it might have been him who was the player, because he's been on that podcast.
Yes.
So it was just quite the time. I hope everything goes well in Columbus, as well as it can, I guess.
I can't even say that. That organization gets what it deserves for hiring Mike Babcock to be honest. Like we talked about when they hired him. They were so desperate for any credibility to be taken seriously. They went to the lowest common denominator of somebody with a decent hockey resume from 7-8 years ago. and very, very clearly could not get somebody else they wanted. Like, I know they were linked to a few different people during the offseason, but they looked at each other and said, Babcock? Yeah. And nobody was like, maybe we shouldn't do this and blah, blah, blah. At the end of all of this, your main takeaway should be skeptic, not cynic. Use your critical thinking skills and think, who does this benefit when they say this? That's my biggest thing. Be skeptical of authority always. That's just a good rule of law when you're operating when it comes to the news. Be skeptical of authority. Make your own determinations and don't let anyone else tell you, well, because this, you should think this. Look at what's going on. Take it in objectively. Who's saying it? What that person's track record of saying things is. And you go from there.
Right.
Like I've said, I'm in the dead middle. I think there was some hyperbole, some exaggeration going on to make a story more compelling, interesting, engaging, whatever, for a podcast. And I think the Blue Jackets, by totally blanket denying the entire characterization of the story, are also obfuscating the truth.
Right. And that's, it's always going to be somewhere in the middle. It really is. Well, most of the time. I should say most of the time. But it's PR people have a job for a reason. And they're the ones that you can thank for these wonderfully crafted statements that sometimes shouldn't see the light of day. But I think that about does it for today's show. I hope that you've all enjoyed this wonderful free crash course on media literacy. You can pay us back by subscribing to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts, as well as YouTube. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter at our respective Twitter accounts at Jase Belmosto and at Nick Zararis. And Nick, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
There will be real hockey to talk about soon. The PTOs are starting to be signed. We're getting there.
We're almost there.